Now, we can only hope that the chloroform was used before the tape was applied, so that Kaylee went peacefully, without fear. But go she did. And she died because she could not breathe. She died because she had 3 pieces of duct tape over her nose and mouth, and she died because her mother decided that the life that she wanted was more important. This murder was premeditated, and the defendant is guilty. Thank you.
You know, for the past 6 weeks, we've been listening to the passionate words of prosecutor Jeff Ashton inside that courtroom. He came out on the short end of this trial, end of this verdict, but has gained so much admiration from around the country. People applauding the job that he did inside that courtroom, fighting for justice for Kaylee Marie Anthony. Well, we have a unique opportunity here on In Session. In the next hour, our own Beth Karras, who herself is a former prosecutor, is going to sit down with Jeff Ashton, and this is all being done live, and is going to ask him questions about the strategy behind the scenes, ask questions that only a former prosecutor can ask. So now I'm going to send this show up to New York, where our own Beth Karras is sitting down, speaking with the prosecutor in the case, Jeff Ashton.
Thank you, Vinny, and thanks, Jeff, for sitting down with me. You know, it's been just over 24 hours since that verdict came in, and when you got word that there was a verdict, it must have been the lunch hour, right? So it was probably actually under 11 hours, probably more like a 9-hour verdict. What were you thinking?
We were feeling pretty good, actually. We felt like we put on a good case, made good arguments, and you know, we were feeling fairly confident. You know, you never know for sure, but we certainly didn't have any reason to think otherwise.
But with a case of this length, this complexity, this circumstantial case, this number of exhibits, that's not a long deliberation. So it sounded like it was going to be a conviction, right?
Well, you know, you never can tell from the length. You just never do. But when you're in a case, you believe in the case. So you know, that's sort of how you go into it. You go into it, you believe in it, you fight for it, and so that's kind of how we walked over there. You know, believing in the case just as much as we did when we started.
Okay, so let's go into the courtroom. You hear the first count, the second count, the third count. What were you thinking then?
Well, I think when they announced her not guilty on the first count, I was like, uh-oh, but thinking maybe they would find her guilty of the ag manslaughter, because that's a possibility. When I heard the not guilty on the child abuse, then I knew that was it, and I just remember mouthing "wow" 4 or 5 times to myself, just in shock, just complete shock.
And people did see that, the wow. But I mean, it still could have been aggravated manslaughter, even if they had rejected it.
Well, yeah, once they found her not guilty of the child abuse, I kind of figured that you know, meant that they weren't going to find her guilty of anything having to do with Kaylee.
Right.
So
let's take a look at that verdict again, okay?
Okay.
Will the defendant rise along with counsel? Madam Clerk, you may publish the verdicts.
Thank you, Judge. In the Circuit Court for the 9th Judicial Circuit in and for Orange County, Florida, the State of Florida versus Casey Marie Anthony. As to case number 2008 CF 15606-0. As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, on this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, verdict as to count 3, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson.
So how many times have you
As to
heard
the
that
charge
again
of
today?
providing false.
A couple of times.
So when you left the courtroom, where did you guys go? Because you didn't come out and give a statement right away.
They had arranged for us to go down through a private elevator to there's a tunnel that runs from the courthouse to our office. and a public defender's office, and they arranged to take us down through there, and then up to the conference room at our office, just to get everybody together. We were going to do that anyway, regardless of what the verdict was. And so we all just met there, law enforcement, our office, and kind of just, processed the verdict.
So what was in the room? What was the mood?
Well, everybody was obviously shocked. Everybody's attitude was we did everything we could do. The investigation was everything it could have been, and we presented everything we could. So there was no recriminations. There was no, oh, we should have done something differently. It was all, well, we did everything we could, and this is how the system works. And we respect the jury's verdict, and that was, I'm sure there was a lot of emotions that were being suppressed, but basically that was it.
Well, let's talk about the investigation then. You said you did everything that you could do. There was a time early on when it was a missing person investigation. When did it turn into a homicide investigation?
Well, it's hard to give an exact point in time when that happens. As the missing person investigation went on, and her lies were more obvious, I think it sort of subtly turned. I think up until the time of the indictment, the sheriff's office was still following up on potential missing persons leads, but pretty much was convinced that Kaylee was in fact dead, which they were right. She was. Well,
you went into the grand jury and you got a first-degree premeditated murder indictment before you had a body.
Right.
The remains, the condition of the remains, the duct tape factored heavily at the trial. But you may have gone to trial without a body. So what was premeditated with the evidence that you had?
The evidence of premeditation that we had then, and of course I can't talk about what was actually said in the grand jury, but the general gist of the evidence at that time was simply, her leaving with Kaylee, and Kaylee never being seen again, and her actions. And I think that was the gist of it. And of course the evidence in the trunk, that was what it was based on, was basically, there's no accidental death suggested by any of those facts, and her conduct certainly was not consistent with an accidental death. So based upon the child being gone, that first-degree murder was what the grand jury decided.
So then, a few months after the grand jury votes the indictment, you find the remains. So how did your strategy change?
Well, I don't think we'd really gotten to the point in the case of deciding on trial strategy at that point, because it was only, 2 months after the indictment. Obviously, that sort of, the investigation had sort of slowed, and then all of a sudden it picked back up again and became much more intense. The forensic evidence possibilities were much greater. So it sort of kick-started it again, but obviously not wasting the effort of a missing person investigation, which clearly by that point it was not.
I remember I was in Orlando when the remains were found, December 11th, and I remember just some days before that your office had decided not to seek death.
Right, yes. We had, I don't remember exactly what the time frame was, but we, based upon the evidence we had then, of course we didn't know how she was killed. We had no idea. So there really wasn't any aggravating circumstances other than the age of the child, which is an aggravator, but I think the assessment was that it was unlikely that a jury would give it, or the court would sustain it without knowing, where she was and all that kind of thing.
So you changed the decision, or your office changed and decided to seek death after the remains were found. Why?
Well, I can't really go into the specifics of the thought process, because those are the state attorney's thought processes for him to discuss or decline to discuss. But I mean, obviously the precipitating event was finding the body, and the evidence that gave us about how Kaylee, we believe, was killed.
I want to play for you a little bit of sound from one of the alternate jurors who did speak, the only juror I'm aware of so far who has spoken, and get your reaction to it. Let's listen.
First of all, when the prosecution did not prove their case, the big question that was, was not answered, how did, Kaylee die? I think there was probably a lot of discussion that it was probably a horrific accident that Dad and Casey covered up, and unfortunately it did snowball and got away from them.
So you've heard this
Right,
alternate juror before. What do you make of his assessment? He didn't have the benefit of deliberating.
Right, and you know, I respect any juror's ability to disagree with, you know, with what I take from a piece of evidence, and I respect that. You know, my question in this case has always been this: if you can look at the photograph of Kaylee's remains and where it was found in the duct tape, and give me a reason why anybody would put duct tape on a child after they were dead, if they died in an accident, that was fine. You know, I felt that was so, and as we argued in the trial, that was so, what was the word I used? I don't know what the word I used was, but so outrageous. The idea that somebody would put duct tape on a child after they were dead, to me, just made so little sense that it left only the possibility of the tape being used to kill Kaylee. I just didn't think there was any other reasonable explanation, but apparently at least one juror, and probably maybe the others, didn't agree.
What was your biggest hurdle at the trial?
Well, the biggest hurdle was you know, the absence of an expert testifying as to cause of death. I mean, Dr. Garavaglia very appropriately said that medically she could not, you know, say that the duct tape caused death because it's a skeleton. You can't say that. You know, whether a jury could conclude it from, you know, reasoning the evidence is a different matter. I guess that was the biggest factor. I mean, I just, you know, you become involved in the case and you believe in it, and I really would love for someone to tell me how that duct tape got there. You know,
I've covered cases where there's no cause of death,
right,
and there's still a conviction.
Sure.
I mean, they're still provable.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've, you know, we've had them too, and it was just, yeah. I don't confess to totally understanding the verdict, but like I said, it's the system we work in, and if you believe in the system, then you have to believe in the jury and accept what they do.
Do you ever think about offering a deal to Casey during the 3 years? Did she ever come to you, her attorney?
I don't know. I don't think that ethically I can talk about any potential plea negotiations. So I'm just going to say no comment on that issue because I'm not sure even after this point that's an appropriate thing for me to talk about.
Really? After an acquittal?
Well, I wouldn't want to do it and then find out later that I was incorrect in doing so. So you know, if the defense wants to talk about that, they can, and or maybe Ms. Anthony will talk about it. I don't know.
Fair enough. In hindsight, do you think maybe the case was overcharged? Would second-degree murder have been better, or maybe aggravated manslaughter as the top charge?
Well, the problem is there really wasn't. You know, if the jury accepted the fact as we saw it that she put the duct tape over Kaylee's mouth when Kaylee was alive, that's first-degree murder. So, you know, there were the lessers provided, there was the felony murder option provided, but to me it would seem, I would feel ridiculous arguing a duct tape excuse other than first-degree murder. To me that was, if it did happen that way, then that's what it was.
As felony murder?
Well, I mean, we offered the jury the option of felony murder just to let them know that was a possibility in case they were thinking, you know, one of those scenarios of some sort of use of the duct tape, you know, to silence the child in an accident, although with 3 pieces of duct tape, that seemed to be a little outlandish, but juries can think what they want. And the main thing was we didn't want the jury to become confused and not know that they could have that option if they wanted to. You
said some minutes ago that this was a thorough investigation, that
yes.
you did everything you could do. Talk to me a little bit about the sheriff's office and Yuri Melish, because he's also sort of the man of the hour, even though your office didn't prevail.
He did an amazing job. I mean, the sheriff's office was incredibly thorough in the way they investigated this case, and they had to wade through a lot of false leads, a lot of wasted man hours on various things. But, you know, there's nothing any law enforcement agency could have done to investigate this case better than